Hi, I'm Dr. Marilyn Schlitz, and I welcome you to this panel on after-death experiences. I'll start by talking about a project that's in process on the Psychomentium. I'll be joined by Dorte Lucci, who will expand on the study we're doing at Sophia University. We will then be joined by Christine Simmons-Moore, who's going to talk about unpacking experiences with entities. And Cal Cooper will wrap us up with after-death communications. So this study on the Psychomentium, we are calling From Grief to Growth, and it's a collaboration with a number of graduate students at Sophia University. This idea of the Psychomentium is really based in an ancient set of practices that involve divining on reflective surfaces. So from crystal balls to reflective pools to rubbing of the Aladdin's lamp to gazing in mirrors, all of these are precursors to what is the contemporary research. By way of background, this idea of the Psychomentium began when psychiatrist Raymond Moody looked into the possibility that these experiences that people had of consciousness after bodily death, near death experiences, out-of-body experiences, apparitions, could all have some validity, and that perhaps there was a process by which we could induce these experiences and therefore study them. He was particularly interested in looking at bereavement as a psychiatrist. The standard Psychomentium was developed originally by Moody, expanded on by Archangel Radin and a number of others. It's a simple protocol. It's a dark, quiet room with a comfortable chair. There is a slightly illuminated mirror just above the person's head so that they don't see their own reflection. And the experience has been shown to trigger these sensory experiences that lie outside ordinary awareness. So the kinds of experiences that have been reported in the Psychomentium include vivid experiences with deceased loved ones, hearing voices, having conversations, spontaneous and unexpected visions or signs that are seen as meaningful, veridical experiences that carry great personal meaning and are actually transformative. And as Radin and Reben noted, mere gazing transforms into a window. Swirling clouds appear in the window, and then intensely vivid visions are seen through the window. This is a commonly reported experience. The current study is a replication and extension of Arthur Hastings' work, in which he conducted studies at the Institute for Transpersonal Psychology, now Sophia University. And he looked at 100 participants. He assessed absorption and bereavement, and he found significant evidence for improvements in bereavement that correlated with the absorption in the experience. So we've extended this protocol to include virtual reality. So we're essentially comparing two experiences. One is people in the Psychomentium chamber and people in a Psychomentium virtual reality experience. We are collecting a short battery of assessments. We're looking at belief in survival, bereavement, absorption, and we're using journaling before and after. People complete these assessments and then they enter the Psychomentium in one of the two conditions. And then afterward, we repeat the assessments. So we are hypothesizing that we'll replicate what Arthur Hastings has seen, which is a correlation between absorption and reduced bereavement, correlation between absorption and belief, and a correlation between the level of immersion and bereavement. This is some of our team. As you see, we have worked really dynamically with our students at Sophia University, all of whom are engaged in a PhD program in transpersonal psychology. So the implications of this study are the measurement of absorption and bereavement, that this is a useful tool for the future, that this VR immersion can be used to enhance these transpersonal experiences beyond the psychomantium. We will be looking at internal neural integration as a result of the experiences, and again, associating that with absorption, and that this technique can be used to scale this procedure by offering a way of taking this study of these unusual experiences and actually beginning to do a predictive study looking at survival of consciousness after death. So I end with this quote by Ernest Becker. The irony of man's condition is that the deepest need is to be free of the anxiety of death and annihilation. But it is life itself which awakens it. And so we must shrink from being fully alive. All right, thank you very much. And I now turn to our next panelist.
Hi, my name is Dr. Dorothea Weyers-Lucci, and I have been working on the Psychomentium, which we also call Grief to Growth Study, and where transpersonal quality of life through integrating grief processes. The protocol of this study was that each volunteer was evaluated for the suitability of the project first off, and there was a pre-experienced battery of evaluations for this. The graduate students that were involved in the study came into the lab to give the pre-experience interviews with the participants, and the participants then remained in a blacked out room viewing a darkened mirror or stayed in a virtual reality headset, depending on which of the experiences they were given. The blacked out room was a totally darkened room with a single electric candle that provided illumination in the darkened chamber. The VR experience had a layout incorporated in the 3D experience, so that the two experiences would be similar. In the VR experience, we had the participants go into a chamber first, and then in VR actually walk into a darkened chamber and sit down in a chair. So participants were encouraged to communicate with the dead through their own conscious thought or through memorabilia of the deceased that they brought with them. In some cases, they brought them into the chamber, or in the case of virtual reality, had them next to them there. Immediately following the Psychomentium experience, each participant was interviewed for approximately 25 minutes. And a week later, there was another or the same battery of evaluations was sent to them to fill out. We use as research products the Adult Attitude to Grief Scale, Beck's Depression Inventory, Self-Reflective Questions, Beck's Anxiety Inventory, Telegram Absorption Scale, and post-interview, as mentioned, for Phenomenological Analysis. And this is a view of the virtual reality as you can see it in the headset. So then they are in the darkened room and they view themselves in the reflection in the mirror. And also as you go on with the experience, we had an out-of-body experience of being able to go into the mirror, turn back and look at yourself there sitting, viewing the mirror, and then coming back into the body. This is the atmosphere that you would have both in the chamber and in the virtual reality experience, and just staring into this light with your intention. Why virtual reality? Well, the quality of being immersive is increasingly held to be a desirable characteristic of many types of media interaction and social settings. So for an immersive experience for virtual reality, the analogy is one of being submerged in water. So it is the sensation of being surrounded by a completely different reality, as different as water is from air, that takes over all of our attention, our whole perceptual apparatus. And the immersion can be then understood via the notion of presence, which is in transpersonal psychology a very important term. And this designates the experience of a subjective positioning within the immersive context. Presence in the experience then is being there entirely. So it's very difficult to even snap out of it in virtual reality. So that you're really forcing this being submerged in water entirely. And there's an analogy here of as there is a higher immediate immersion, there's a higher transpersonal immersion, whereby it is possible from a transpersonal perspective to reach states of meta-awareness and transcendence. Our forefathers knew this. Historically, this is not just the case in the Sufi tradition, but this is from a museum in Berlin, where there is a prayer booth where you could lie down and do your prayers and look up and be entirely surrounded by this immersive booth, if you will, for prayer. So actually, immersion is nothing new. In prayer. Virtual reality is used for so many different things because of these possibilities, from schizophrenia to obesity, from chronic pain to anxiety and depression. Preliminary findings of our study: some of the participants communicated with their deceased loved ones. There was also a communication possible with their inner psyche and deeper consciousness that would enable them to gain a better understanding of their mind and what was going on in their process of grief and grow through realization. Experiences such as the visual experiences, the auditory experiences, and paranormal presences were repeatedly indicated. The majority of participants actually lost their perception of time and space entirely and became unaware of their spatial surroundings and lapsed in the time elapsed in the experience. The participants' intentions and the will to have an experience was directly proportional to, for example, the intensity of their experience and the depth of meaning they derived from the experience. When the participants could enter an altered state of consciousness, the intention they would be holding would find a meaningful way to communicate to them what they would value most. So the intention that was set is really important in this case. The first qualitative findings for both chamber and VR, participant 47 reported a full visual experience with her father, seeing and feeling his presence, playing music with him, walking around him, even driving around with him. Participant 39 reported hearing a bell. There was always a strong physical awareness of the departed in these cases, such as sitting on a couch beside them, even taking their hand, touching them, and with such comments as, "I felt like I'd been with my father for an hour." And one participant, following a lengthy interview, realized she'd been substituting fear for the grief that she had felt for the death of her father. So all of these realizations seem to be transformational. So we're looking to change or work with the perception into a deeper understanding of the grief process, into an expression of this into being. So therefore, from constriction, from the grief to agency, which would be the transformational process. This is a painting by Dali that really speaks to how our perception can transform the way we see the world. In this case, a painting that can be both Lincoln or Gala, Dali's partner. Thank you very much for listening, and you can reach me through email or my Twitter account at any time. Thank you.
Christine Simmons-Moore, and I'm going to be talking to you for a few minutes today about our recent research at the University of West Georgia, where we've been trying to unpack and understand experiences people have with entities. The study that I'm going to describe a little bit of included a survey and a psychomanteum component. So the results of the qualitative analysis of an open-ended section in our survey found a variety of themes pertaining to ghost-type experiences, and these range in terms of complexity. And these levels of complexity seem to be implicated in how people made sense of these experiences, which I'll come to a little bit later. So the experiences range from being very, very simple, simple figures, simple watchful presences, then moving towards invasive or intruding presences. Then we had a whole range of experiences that suggested ghost-type phenomena that included non-visual, localized felt presences, interactive presences, patterned noises, so more auditory-based phenomena, externalized visual apparitions happening in the context of dreams, and then multisensory haunting experiences that seem to really indicate the presence of a ghost. We also found a significant proportion of the experiences suggested experiences of connection with deceased loved ones that fit the category of after-death communications. And these seem to include reassuring interactive presences, visit dreams, which were very tangible lived experiences of encounters with loved ones in the dream state, and apparitions of the deceased that were recognized by the person. There seem to be several overarching themes across these different types of ghost experiences. And these included sensitivity and connectivity that indicate a certain level of boundary thinness, so how connected the person is within themselves. And this actually was found as well in terms of the statistics from this study, where we found that transliminality was one of the key correlates of these experiences, particularly when ghost phenomena were packaged up as paranormal rather than non-paranormal. We had meaningful interactive experiences. We had challenging, complex perceptual phenomena. So these things seem to happen out of the blue and really stimulate a variety of senses rather than just the visual sense or the auditory sense. And those seem to be particularly challenging for people's understandings of reality. There was also external presence, that something was felt to be there, but was very tangible and had a certain sense of energy, emotion, and effects in terms of the body. So people seem to try to make sense of these experiences with recourse to various organizing frameworks and schemata. So these included the idea that they knew that the house was haunted, or that they had lost a person and had memories of that deceased person that were informing their experience, and a whole range of other things, including people's understandings of what a ghost implies in terms of sanity and ideas of reality. Appraisals differ for different types of experiences, and they can be labeled neutral or positive or negative. And they seem to be neutral when people realize after living with these things for a long time, so being generally sensitive, that ghosts will not harm them. They also were more likely to be neutral when they were shared with social others, which implies a shared reality is important here. Positive experiences were oftentimes the after-death type communication phenomena, where people got a valuable opportunity to spend time with a deceased loved one. Or, in the context of more traditional haunting phenomena, the appreciation of a playful ghost. And there was also social context and shared reality that was appraised more pleasantly. Negative experiences seem to be more associated with the sudden, complex perceptual type phenomena, plus a negative message or feeling. So it's a really tangible, out the blue experience. And this is where oftentimes there was not a visual experience as well. So it's something unseen, and particularly negative when there were violations of the physical environment, including the body, that seemed to be very, very tied with negative emotion. So oftentimes these were sleep paralysis type experiences. In the Psychomentium, we explored systematically the creation of these encounter experiences under controlled conditions. And we found a range of correlates of these experiences that are important when we try to make sense of the whole thing. We found that synesthetes, people who have an extra way of experiencing the world, and non-synesthetes both reported exceptional experiences. But there was an interesting pattern for synesthetes only for some of the other relationships. So the extent to which an experience was felt to take up space correlated with random number generator anomalies, and was significant for synesthetes only. In addition, the extent to which an experience was felt to take up space also correlated with GMF and was significant for synesthetes only. So some interesting implication that synesthetes are representing these anomalous interactions in interesting ways. Infrared camera anomalies, or SPECs, seem to be associated with significant differences in the random number generator output, but just for the Psychomentium condition, which is really interesting. In terms of the experiences themselves, we did have a range of presences that were emerging in this context. So including smell as presence, figures or lights or colors, just voices, mirror anomalies, shadows, the space feeling different, strong emotion, movement in the room, heaviness or changes in the body, physical or other interaction with the presence, and vivid imagery. So with the last one, this would be something like the sudden experience of the deceased person at a different point in their life, perhaps. And it was felt to be very much associated with the deceased person that they were trying to connect with. So I've got a few examples here of the positive impact of some of these encounters. So, we've got the correlates of the experiences here, and this is what the experiences are like. And they really do connect back with the patterns that we identified in the survey. These were much more in the category of the positive type of experience, but they were also emotional, but emotional in a very different way. So I'll just pull out the first one because of time. One participant had a very emotional and beautiful experience where she felt someone touch her hair, which she seemed to feel was her father. And this happened when she stopped trying to have the experience. So there were good emotions felt in the chamber. Even when people felt that they wanted to cry, it was really appraised very, very positively. So we see here again, this opportunity to really connect with the deceased being extremely valuable here. And then going back to the interesting correlates that we found, if real, these patterns indicate that ghosts in the Psychomentium are very, very meaningful experiences, but they are also situated, co-created anomalies that are emerging between the embodied experience in person and the local, perhaps non-local environment, and certainly are in need of more investigation. That's my time up now. So I just want to say thank you to the BL Foundation for funding this project. Thanks for your attention. I look forward to answering questions in our discussion at the end of the panel.
If you don't know me, I'm Callum E. Cooper. I'm based at the University of Northampton within Exceptional Experiences and Consciousness Studies research group. And one of my main focuses has been after-death communication. So these will be experiences where, certainly around the time of death, but after someone has died, a friend or relative, you experience sense of presence phenomena, apparitions, strange smells, sights, sounds, maybe even dream of that person, symbolic phenomena, anything that suggests that person is still around in some way. This was really kickstarted by the Society for Psychical Research in many ways. Their initial book, Phantasms of the Living, the classic 2 volumes, produced many accounts of these instances. So Edmund Gurney and Frederick Myers decided to take a number of these accounts and start to further analyze them, which then appeared in the proceedings. And so in this case, they took 231 cases of hallucinations of the dead, in which 28 occurred within 1 week of the death of the individual visualized. Many accounts were revisited from the book, Phantasms of the Living. And in 104 cases, it was not known whether the recipient's cases preceded or followed the experienced death. Bear in mind, this is the late 1800s. They got a lot of their accounts via postal correspondence, sometimes from books as well. It just wasn't possible in some instances to follow up that additional information that are required to know about the full extent of these experiences. In 40 cases, the experiences of apparitions occurred within a 24-hour period. And this is what we know as that crisis period as well, 12 hours leading up to death and afterwards. Someone is going through a crisis, they're dying, they're in pain, something like that, and they're visualized by a family member, or they've just recently died. This is a sketch example of what they were talking about in terms of how their data was looking. In the week leading up to someone's death, so perhaps on their deathbed, there is an increase in reported experiences. At the moment of death, there is a peak reported by family, friends, physicians, nurses, which is well known in various books like William Barrett's Deathbed Visions, Osis and Haraldson at the Hour of Death. We also have as well The Art of Dying by Fenwick and Fenwick. So certainly text to check out. There was also in volume 10 of the Proceedings of the Society for Psychical Research, the classic Senses of Hallucinations, in which one of the questions asked was, have you ever had a vivid impression of seeing or being touched or of hearing voices, which impression, so far as you could discover, was not due to any external cause? From sending out 17,000 questionnaires, when they were returned, about 10% of reports that came back from these surveys suggested that people could relate to these kinds of experiences. The next major jump, though, was for medical science and thanatology, the study of death, dying, and bereavement, to really start to pay attention to these phenomena that psychical research and parapsychology, even with the help of people like Louisa Ryan as well from her spontaneous case collection, they paid all this attention to it, but it had just not integrated into medical care and wider science. They hadn't acknowledged it until William Derry Rees. He was a general practitioner working in North Wales. He was interested in what happens in various instances of death. He'd published on this. He was quite widely published as a general practitioner, and it's not usual for someone to be practicing and doing research at the same time. And he wanted to get recognized by the research community. So after he became a GP, he then pursued doing an MD research degree at King's College London, and he wanted to just look at the negative side effects of bereavement. When he did that, he discovered that when he nearly finished all of his interviewing of 293 widows and widowers, many people reported hallucinations, sensations of the dead person around them. So he went back and interviewed them all, and that became the basis for his thesis. He graduated in 1971. In that same year, he summarized his medical doctorate into this paper, which was published in the British Medical Journal, which is now widely cited, talking about all the breakdown of his statistics from these interviews and the things that people mentioned. One of them being that the vast majority of people find these experiences to be very helpful to their process of recovery. So there he is, and there's an example as well of some of the stats that were coming out of this. I had a lot of correspondence with Derry Rees. He was really helpful with my own PhD on this topic, and sadly he passed away in 2018. But if you want to know more about him, I did provide an obituary for him in the Journal of the Society of Psychical Research. He also had an autobiography out and a further book on this, Pointers to Eternity, which came out in 2010, where he'd still been following this up and had been looking at people's accounts of this in newspaper reports in church newspapers and things like that. The next person to really take this forward with a doctorate was Julian Burton, who was an actor by profession. That was his background, but he'd had an experience himself of his mother, which contained veridical qualities. He'd noticed her wearing a dress that wasn't familiar to him, and he called up his sister and told her about the experience, in which she was absolutely shocked that he'd seen her apparition, but understood what the blue dress meant, because she'd been out shopping with her mother, and her mother had wanted to buy this particular dress but decided not to in the end. So he was really surprised by these veridical qualities within the after-death communication. He summarized his own PhD in an article that came out in Fate magazine. So his own study was a survey of 206 people. He mainly went to different colleges and went to psychologists and psychology students to ask of their experiences, and found, much like Derry Rees, that over 50% of people report these kinds of experiences. And it's across the lifespan. I think from people age 16 through into their 80s, 90s were reporting these. He said, "I'm afraid a bias still exists which considers it unacceptable to deal at face value with experiences such as seeing ghosts. The patient is trained to deny the experiences or to explain it away as holding on to the loved one." There's been many doctorates since then. People have done their whole PhD, their PsyD on this, and they've gone to a lesser extent in terms of participant numbers. They focused on small groups and interviews. And so the next step was to do another major survey as large as William Derry Rees had done in 1971. So we did questionnaires that take about 45 minutes to fill in, very detailed. We thought about every aspect of the after-death communication, and they came out in English, Spanish, and French versions, which were placed on Evelyn's website. We are the core research team for this, and it's an ongoing project. So there is also Chris Rowe and David Lorimer as well. And that's us out there in Geneva at Evelyn's home working on this survey. Initially, our survey produced over 1,000 respondents, which was then broken down, and we looked at all the various categories, and much like Derry Rees, looked at the main statistics of everything that was going on, knowing that we could take all the subcategories and explore them further. So there were some initial booklets produced that can be obtained from us. One is on the main research findings broken down, so our initial research findings, more the stats, and then another one on some of the cases people were mentioning. And this has produced so much detail for us. So Derry Rees got that paper in the British Medical Journal. We sidetracked a bit more to what his medical doctorate was in. It was officially under psychiatry. And so we've managed to get this main core paper accepted. It's in press now in the British Journal of Psychiatry Open. But we have many other things to break down as well. We've also got a paper on sensory experiences in Explore. There's also another paper that's just in press in Omega, the Journal of Death and Dying. But we have all these other elements as well. We've got a paper coming out on crisis cases and messages received for the Society for Psychical Research. Experiences of unknown deceased individuals, so where it's not particularly involved with bereavement, and yet people have encountered the known to someone recently deceased. Looking at the qualities of apparitions, the sense of presence phenomena, and these are just a few examples. So there are so many qualities and breakdowns we've got to further explore from this. I've even had some of my own dissertation students looking at this, even with negative near-death experiences, which are very rare, but we've also had people look at this. So Renard Evrard, he's also collaborated with us, and a paper has also just been accepted in Impress looking at the negative side to after-death communications and what goes on within those. There has been one paper recently which came out about this, thanks to Chris French for highlighting it to me. The unusual thing about this particular paper was they only focused on an elderly population, and so it seemed that the impact of death really hit these people a lot more and gave oversight to any experiences they seemed to have. And so they came to the conclusion that these experiences are negative and not really good for the bereavement process. But looking through the paper and also their citations, they had no prior knowledge or citations to anything from psychical research history or anything really from the history that followed William Derry Rees. So I do think this paper has a lot more that could be done. It's a bit skewed in terms of their background knowledge, and also because of that, how they've drawn their conclusions. So I wouldn't necessarily agree with their findings about what negative instances mean, or that these experiences on the whole are negative. I strongly disagree with that. We found quite consistently that they're very, very helpful to people. And when they are negative, it's usually because of the initial shock factor. They seem to reorganize this and find positives out of it. So that's a brief summary of after-death communications, and the research is branching out into different areas. So we're getting in different textbooks, so looking at the veridical qualities of these experiences, also the impact that anomalous experiences can have on our positive psychology, our personal well-being as well. So thank you very much.